trouble is, it's basically like atheism for second graders.
Yeah.
It feels like reading the atheism thread on Reddit.
My name is Lauren, and today I'm with David, and we're with a special guest, C.D. Cunningham, who is going to be talking to us about the upcoming film, Heretic, which releases on November 8th.
Did you feel like that was the intent of the writers, to kind of get you on board with the villain a little bit?
They wanted to create a think piece where people would leave being like, what an interesting movie about religion. That gave me a lot to think about.
Was the Q&A after helpful at all for understanding anything?
So you've got some knowledge about what actually happens in the movie.
I did get to see it, yeah.
We got a hold of the script.
We'll just spoiler alerts, right? Like, we're going to be talking about stuff here. So if you plan on seeing it, beware. Maybe walk us through kind of what Latter-day Saints should expect from the movie.
So yeah, it's about these two sister missionaries. And if you saw the trailer, they kind of look and walk like sister missionaries. And it's kind of a little bit like, as Latter-day Saints, we get so few depictions in movies that feel authentic. You kind of want to sit up and be like, ooh, there's something here. Someone's actually understanding. And then you get to the first scene and the sister missionaries are sitting there on the bus bench. And the one's like, so, how big is your brother-in-law's genitals? And you're like, what in the holy is happening in this movie?
Oh.
And then it's like, so I was watching this pornography the other day and they got caught in the middle of it. And, it looked like her spirit went out of her body when they got caught. And so, man, that really helped my testimony. And you're like, no one talks this way, least of all sister missionaries. And so you kind of have like these people who kind of have the similitude of missionaries, and yet some writer has decided that they want to put some very odd, weird agenda in the mouths of these missionaries, and you're like, this is weird.
So are they portrayed more as like hypocrites? Because obviously Latter-day Saints, like, we have the law of chastity.
Sure.
We believe about, in being pure and having pure thoughts, things like that. Are they portrayed as hypocritical or just like naive / ignorant of things, or both?
When you look at kind of Latter-day Saint depictions in media, right, you get a number of different stereotypes, right? You get naive. That's one of our big ones. And so you get one, Sister Paxton is naive. And then you get rebellious, right? That's Sister Barnes is kind of our rebellious one. She's the one who's world wise. And then you get, violent people and happy family people, right? Like, those are kind of the four stereotypes we typically
kind
get
of all over the place there.
Yeah.
It really is. This one has kind of those two, right? You've got the two sisters who kind of fit in those two stereotypes. And so they're not displayed as hypocrites. It's almost like, here's what the missionaries are really talking about when you're not listening. And you're like, I don't think they are, because I know a lot of them.
Yeah.
So it's more like peeking behind the curtain rather than self-consciously knowing that these are kind of aberrations.
In reading the script, not only did it not sound anything like any missionaries would talk about, it just also didn't sound like how people would talk. And I remember you had mentioned that the writing was poor overall.
It is.
Which is interesting for the same writers who created the A Quiet Place, all those movies, which are well written. So it's...
See, I disagree with you.
Okay.
I like A Quiet Place. I think A Quiet Place has great production design. I think it has great mood. I think it's directed very well. And so it's paced well, but I don't think the script is good. I think the script is probably the weakest part of A Quiet Place. And it almost seems like, so you took the weakest part of the successful movie, let those guys spin off, and then do their own whole movie. And that in fact, that might be a good way to describe it. This movie is all the worst parts of A Quiet Place, which was a fine movie by itself. But yeah, I mean, you haven't seen it yet, but yeah.
No, yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I can totally picture what you're saying. And A Quiet Place had its redeeming qualities with, I guess, the actors who were casted.
100%, yeah.
And the actors in this one, I do recall you saying that Hugh Grant, great choice, right?
He was
but
fantastic.
In comparison to these newcomers who are playing the sister missionaries, Chloe East, Sophie Thatcher.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on that?
Are they members?
They were.
They're both former members.
They're both former members.
Newcomers to acting. so there's a lot. I mean, this is like kind of a psychological thriller. And so a lot of it's like their reactions, they're doing it. It's a lot to put on sort of a new actor. And no, I mean, I don't want to pick on them, but no, I don't think they were really up for the job. And I think that's part of what makes the movie not work so much is really the most compelling character is this guy who the writers seem to like a lot. He's so charming, and yet he's the bad guy, I guess. And that's Hugh Grant. And because the two actors who play the sister missionaries just kind of aren't nearly as good, I don't think it balances, and it kind of makes it almost seem like who should be the bad guy by any reasonable definition sort of seems like the smart and reasonable one. And like, it makes it feel like the writers were actually trying to channel their thoughts and feelings through the villain because of how much better he is as an actor.
Do you think it's coincidence that the actors playing the sister missionaries are both former members?
Oh, well, it's not a coincidence. So in Toronto, they had a Q&A afterward. And so Sophie Thatcher, Chloe East were there. And they also had some of the production staff. So the directors didn't know that they had been members of the church before, but the casting director had known that. And she said she cast them for that reason. So it wasn't, I mean, that was on purpose.
And
they do seem, like I said, they do kind of walk and talk like members of the church, which often you don't get in movies. So maybe them having that experience with our community did give them a leg up in some of those ways. But I think if you had put some good actors in there, it probably would have made a bigger difference.
But what's interesting about that is the things they have to say in the movie. A lot of it doesn't really fall in line with anything any member would say, let alone any human would say. And so obviously they don't have control over the writing.
Yeah.
But it just seems like that would make it harder to play since they have experience with our community. And then they're saying things like, oh, baptizing him would be so good for my salvation. Like, I haven't heard that ever. Last I checked, missionaries are very aware that they're doing the Lord's work, and this doesn't give them any special brownie points in heaven.
Yeah, that's a weird thing at the beginning is, so kind of, they had some warning that Mr. Reed might be a little bit of a weirdo, but Paxton says she's never had a baptism.
And Paxton is the naive
That is the
sister.
naive, junior companion. And Barnes is like, I've got all these baptisms in New England, because that's what happens. You baptize dozens and dozens of people in New England. And she's like, we're going to get you a baptism. So that's why they go and risk it and go to Mr. Reed's house.
When they're told not to.
Yeah, it's like, because we got to get Paxton a baptism. And so that's kind of what motivates it at the beginning. And yeah, it's really weird. It doesn't sound like the way members of the church talk about missionary work. It doesn't.
Right.
It's just kind of just off.
Right.
But the sister missionaries, despite being kind of vulgar and all these different things, they're the good guys.
100%.
And Hugh Grant, who's kind of portrayed as the smart logical one, is the bad guy.
I think that's part of what makes the movie so hard is because by any rights, he's the bad guy. And yet he sounds way smarter than anyone else. He's so charming, right? And he gets to talk so much about what he thinks that he gets to justify all these evil things that he's doing. And so the people who are kind of sitting there, it's like, well, when you get to listen to a character justify themselves that much, at some point you kind of get on board. That's kind of how it seemed to me.
Did you feel like that was the intent of the writers, to kind of get you on board with the villain a little bit?
I do, because I think what the writers wanted, they wanted to create a think piece where people would leave being like, what an interesting movie about religion. That gave me a lot to think about. The trouble is that for all the brilliant insights that Hugh Grant has, it's basically like atheism for second graders. Like, it's just not that clever.
Yeah.
It feels like reading the atheism thread on Reddit. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, you
just
guys
packaged
are
in a
so
horror
smart.
Film.
So, everyone's just so impressed with themselves. And it's like, I don't know who these people are that they think they're speaking to that are going to be so interested in religion, but who have never thought over and over, backwards and forwards about the kinds of things that Grant is saying. But of course, the sister missionary is like, whoa, you're so smart. And I'm like, Okay. Because he's presented as smart. Like, we're supposed to think he's smart. It's just, I think the writers think they're smart. And so they wanted to put their thoughts. They said that in this Q&A, they're like, we were influenced by Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. And I'm like, you guys wish you were influenced by by these people. Like, I'm sure you read their books, but man, like, these guys, you can disagree with them, and yet they're still elevating. They're still giving you ideas to work with and challenge. And I mean, these guys are just operating at a different level than kind of those new atheists. Yeah.
There's a difference between appearing smart and actually being intelligent.
Sure.
And I think, I don't know if we want to talk about this point of the script yet, but what makes Mr. Reed's intelligence lose all of its validity for me is when you get closer to the end and you see all these elderly women he has in cages in his in the catacombs of his house.
Yeah.
Because at that point you are a psychopath, sociopath, both, whatever one applies there. And then you kind of lose all validity with all of your statements because now you're just evil. now it's just pure evil.
And I think that's part of what prevents it from just being like a hit piece, right? Like, this is not a pure hit piece against the church. It's just lazy. It's just poorly thought out, because he is the bad guy in the end. Here's his big genius takeaway. He's been studying religion for 50 years, and he's discovered that the true church is control. This is his genius conclusion. And so, yes, he's controlling all these women. He gets one of them at the end to reach their finger out so he can chop it off with some hedge clippers, and she just allows him to do it because he has total control over her. And it's like,
because they believe he's a prophet, right?
No. He's not the prophet. I'm not sure how he gets them to do it. We never go into it. He has one of them pretend to be a prophet. They eat a poison pie.
Right.
After that person dies, they drag that body out and bring another one in to trick the sister missionaries into thinking that they saw a miracle. And then the new body they brought in is now pretending to be a prophet and has some vision of the afterlife. It seems like, because he's so obsessed with control, it seems like he wants to get the sister missionaries to kill themselves. Like, that kind of seems like what his hope was at the beginning of it. It doesn't end up going that way. He ends up killing Sister Barnes because she's not agreeing with them as much. And then him and Paxton end up killing each other at the end, right after Paxton, loses her faith. And because Mr. Reed was so convincing, how could she not?
Wait a minute. So she sees this guy with all these women in cages, and she's like, you know what? That's the guy who I'm going to be listening to.
It's not quite that bad. But yeah, at the end, she's like dying. He had stabbed her, and she's like, we all know prayer doesn't work, but sometimes it's just nice to think about anyway. And you're
it's
like,
just
really,
nice
you
to
just
think about other people.
It's nice to think about other people, yeah. And I'm like, really, this is where your testimony is at the end is. Yeah, prayer's not real. Like this is where you've come to. Like, what a sad ending.
Well, I'm wondering if that's indicative of because in the beginning she says something on the first page even that's interesting. She's talking about marketing and advertising, and because they saw the condom ad, and she says it makes you think someone who doesn't believe the Book of Mormon is true probably doesn't believe it's true because they've just been told that their entire life. And the same applies vice versa. And so it makes me think maybe she had doubts from the beginning, and that's what spurred all that kind of weird conversation she had with Sister Barnes.
Yeah, maybe.
And so now she's just admitting to these doubts at the end. I want to go so far as to say he really convinced her of anything. At least I hope not. Then again, I haven't seen the movie, so.
The thing is these would be kind of fun characters if they felt like characters who had their own mind and thoughts that we could kind of analyze in this way, right? Like, oh, what's this character? But they don't feel like people independent of the writers. What it feels like is one of the writers had tried to hit on a sister missionary. You've met these people who try and hit on someone and they say no, and they're like, well, I didn't like you anyway. I'm better than you. You wouldn't even deserve me, right? And it seems like that's kind of how they felt. But these people know how to write a screenplay, and so they're like, I can turn you into my little voodoo doll and make someone like you and make you say whatever I want because I have
Mhm.
control. Like, it seems like the
Mm.
writers are Mr. Reed
Yeah,
who get to
I was gonna
control
say
these
that.
missionaries by creating these little characters of them and being like, what do I wish a sister missionary would say? Sex, sex, sex. Because, oh, what do I wish I could do? Oh, I want to, take her pants off. What do I want to make fun of? Oh, we're going to talk about magic underwear 700 times in the movie. All right, like 8 times, but
Mm.
what do I want them to do? Oh, I want them to fight, I want to tell them how stupid their religion is. And is it going to work? Yeah, it's going to work. Of course. I'm so smart. They're going to change their mind. Like, it seems like that's kind of the bit here, which is gross and ugly and dumb. The worst thing about this movie, though, is because they're so obsessed with listening to themselves talk, it's boring. Like, it's just a
Mm.
waste of 2 hours. Like, you just go, like, if you really want to hear a lecture on atheism, go look up a TED Talk, right? Like, then it'll be done in 10 minutes and it'll be said by someone a lot smarter. Like, it's just,
But less charming.
but less
Hugh
charming.
Grant.
That is true. It just drags on because the writers can't get out of their own way. They don't want to tell the story because they're so obsessed with preaching to you about how all religion is made up and it's just control and atheism is so smart and yada, 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 yada. And you're just like, man, if you could just get out of your way, it might still be gross, but at least it would be interesting.
Mhm.
And they can't get out of their way. They're just
Mhm.
so obsessed with I mean, I don't know what happened. It just seems like they have a bone to pick. That's what the whole script seems like.
That's so disappointing
It
because
is.
I on Keystone's Instagram page, when the first trailer first came out, they didn't reveal much about like how they were going to be treating the church or religion in general. And so initially I was like, this could be really interesting.
I felt the same
This
way.
could be cool.
Yeah.
It could be legitimately like creepy and fun. And it just feels like it really has fallen short of that, which is just such a bummer.
Yeah, I had a lot of hope because I feel like you kind of mentioned this earlier, but I don't feel there's a lot of normal and natural depictions of Latter-day Saints in media that isn't directly created by the church or another entity that's really close with the church. But so I was really hopeful that like horror movies are something that's so, normal, that this was going to be like normalizing members of the church and not make them seem like they're too weird or too extreme or too naive or whatever. It was going to be like kind of good, make us just seem like other people in society. And it absolutely did not do that. It ran with the stereotypes.
So the whole theme is control, right? Like that's
Yeah.
what all religion is about. They just want to control people. And like I hear that from this movie. I hear that outside of the movie.
Mhm.
And then I look at President Nelson and the apostles in the church and I'm like, are these guys, do they just want to control me? I just don't see it. Like I've met some of them personally. I spent a day or two with Elder Renland in
That was
Tonga
cool.
while he was on assignment there. And I followed along. I was part of his, entourage or whatever, following along with his schedule. And I could barely keep up. And it's like, if these guys want power and control, like,
They're in the wrong place.
yeah, like they're working all the time. And it's just like, why would they do that if they're just, trying to, I don't know. It doesn't add up for me as a Latter-day Saint.
There's a group called the Radiant Foundation. They're a new group and they're about faith in media is one of their major initiatives, Faith in Media Initiative. And they just did some research saying like 65%. I'll send you the link to do it so you can check my numbers because I'm just doing this off the top of my head. But a significant percentage of people here in the United States feel like their faith is misrepresented in movies, like well over half. And it was like, man, that's not Latter-day Saints feeling like, why is everyone picking on us? It's like over and over and over again, we're looking at what we're seeing on television and film, and none of us are seeing ourselves. And why is that? What are these people who produce movies? What is the disconnect between them and most of everyone else in the country and the way they kind of practice their faith?
How did Heretic make you feel walking away from it? Because even in just reading the script, I felt icky. I just felt like
Yeah.
confused, but in a gross kind of way. Not confused like my faith was shaking, but confused and just like
What are you doing?
Well, yeah, what is happening
What did I
right
just
now?
read?
Exactly.
Um,
I just that kind of confusion. How'd you feel after watching
You
it?
don't have any kids, right, Lauren?
No.
You have kids.
Yes.
2?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you know what it's like when you're trying to teach your 2-year-old to eat and they're putting it and it's all over their face and it's all in their mouth. They got too much hair and you're doing this and it's super gross, but not gross in a way where you're like captivated. Gross in a way where you're just like, all right, just finish that and then I'll come back. That's how I felt walking out of
I see.
Heretic.
That was
It's
such
like
a-
watching a
That's-
2-year-old learn to eat.
Was the Q&A after helpful at all for understanding anything?
The Q&A. Okay, so this is weird, but Hugh Grant was like, yeah, I relate a lot with Mr. Reed. That's why I was able to play him so well. I'm like, I don't know that I wanted to know that about Hugh Grant. I don't know that gives me much respect for
Was he
him.
being sarcastic?
No, he was being
Maybe he was just talking about the like atheist portion of it because he's not
I think
a
that's
believer.
what he meant. Yeah, because that's what the question was. It was like, did you have a hard time playing someone who was so opposed to religion? He's like, no,
I'm like this normally. This is a Tuesday
yeah,
afternoon.
I'm not a
for
man
me.
of belief, so I related a lot to Mr. Reed, and I was like, oh.
Was he charming in real life? I've been a Hugh Grant fan, so when I saw him being,
I mean, I only
in this
saw him on
movie-
stage in a theater with probably 800 other people, and he was tired. That's what he
Yeah.
was. I mean, he was fine. I certainly don't mean to disparage him,
Yeah.
but this is a big movie festival. I'm sure he'd been doing a huge press junket, and so he was just kind of moving through the motions. It looked like, but
historically I've been a huge Hugh Grant fan, and so
me too. I thought he
to
was
see
so
him
funny
in
in
this-
Wonka. Love Actually is like my 15th favorite movie ever. Yeah,
Notting Hill.
yeah.
So to see him,
Well,
disappointed.
there's a part in the script that I wonder if he also relates to about Mr. Reed, and that is Mr. Reed does go, so on one hand, if God is real, and then he says all these incorrect statements, and he only helps you when you praise him, and his ego is so big, God meaning his ego is so big that like you have to like always come and apologize to him, and also he hates gay people, so all of these things he says about God. He's like, so if that's all true, that's terrifying. But on the other hand, if God isn't real and we are a bunch of, I think he says, horny microscopic ants on a floating rock in space, that's also terrifying.
Yeah.
So I wonder, Hugh Grant defines himself as a non-believer, but is he at peace with that, or is it terrifying to him? That's what
I
I'm
don't
curious
know.
about. Because in the movie, Mr. Reed doesn't seem to believe anything. He's like, religion is just control. But they never went back and addressed, okay, both options are terrifying, so like, you just live in fear.
If I was to try and say, okay, I obviously don't think the script was written well. I
Right.
think their motives probably were different than what they are willing to admit to themselves. But if I was to say, what do they think they wanted to say?
Yeah.
I think what they were trying to say is, well, religion's obviously false, but you might be a better person if you're religious anyway.
Which is kind of like what Sister Paxton said at the end, where it's
Yeah.
prayer doesn't work, but it's nice to think about other people.
Nice to think
for
about other
once, yeah.
people. Because then you don't end up like Mr. Reed being a
Where you're
psychopath.
falling down. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, if I was an atheist, I wouldn't watch this movie either. I'd be like, man, this is very derogatory towards atheists. you cannot believe in God and also not be a psychopath,
Yeah,
right?
that's what it seems like. It's,
it almost seems like
signing
it's
up to
worse
be-
on atheists than us, but it's pretty bad on Latter-day Saints too. They seem to have a bone to pick with us and not with atheists, but it's a pretty bad movie for them too.
One thing that I've noticed is how kind of the church has been in the media a lot, it seems like, lately, and I feel like I'm seeing kind of this pattern of like soft leaving the church, or losing your faith but not full out leaving the church. So for instance, like Andrew Garfield in, what was that Hulu show?
Under the Banner of
Under the
Heaven.
Banner of Heaven.
Yeah.
Like he goes through this big faith crisis, and then at the end he doesn't believe anymore, but he kind of comes to the same place where it's like, but it's nice to, culturally be a faithful person. He doesn't leave the church, but inside he's lost his faith. And it seems like this is kind of the same here, where it's like, I've lost my faith in prayer, but it's still nice to think about other people or whatever. Do you think that that's like a strategy, like a subtle strategy, or I don't know, just an observation that I feel
imagine
like I've
it's a
seen.
position people come to honestly. But it just is. There's this line, I think it was Mark Twain who first said it about our people, but I could be wrong on that. Who said, the people are good, but what they believe is nonsense. And that seems to be the way a lot of people feel about Latter-day Saints. And I think what they miss is we are who we are because of what we believe, right? Like these beliefs are efficacious. They change us, and you can't get all of them without the other, right? That you can't produce all of the fervor and goodness without the structure for understanding who you are and who you're becoming and who you worship and the value of people around you, right? Like those things are entwined. And so, so this idea that people are like, oh, I've got to be so honest. And when I think about it with my brain, it doesn't make sense. So it can't be true. So I have to believe that. But also these are good people. So I want that. I don't know that it's a sustainable place. And in my observation, what ends up happening is when those two things are then at odds for a long time, what ends up dropping out is the community, the faith, the goodness, right? That when you can't hold on to it intellectually, the other side disappears over time. And like I said, that's not to say that people I know who are former Latter-day Saints or people who are atheists, their whole lives are coming from other traditions, can't also have deep moral values. But in terms of, like you're saying, is there a strategy for this middle ground? Maybe, because it seems like over time, this middle ground does struggle to kind of maintain.
So what's the ultimate message for Latter-day Saints who are thinking about seeing this movie, or how should we respond?
I mean, it's going to be in the zeitgeist, so I kind of get why people want to talk about it and be informed. I wrote up a Q&A with the staff at Public Square. So if you're curious about the movie, I'd go spend 10 minutes reading that instead of $15 and 2 hours on this movie. We tried to do a good job of saying, hey, I hate the movie, but let's just tell you what's happening so you can kind of make up your own mind about it and kind of about the beats that happen. So check that out and save yourself some money and time.
So whether you go watch the movie or not, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let us know in the comments if you want us to talk more about the movie or any other movies that are coming out soon or any that have already come out. We'd love to chat about them on here. And while you're here, check out this video. We'll see you next time.